start recording. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our session. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on wherever you're connecting from. Let me introduce first myself. I am Buket Altınçelep. I am the chair of this session, and I work at the Secretariat of Environmental Peacebuilding Association as an Environmental Peacebuilding Coordinator. And I'm also a master's student at Middle East Technical University at the Department of International Relations in Turkey. And before starting, I would like to share some housekeeping rules. So first, we have a code of conduct. Since we are an online community, but it is not an excuse, as a reminder, harassment in every form is unacceptable. In this regard, if you witness or subjected to unacceptable behavior in this session or other sessions, please just let us know, and we will provide the necessary information and instructions through the chat box. Please pay attention to this policy, because by registering and joining this session, you are abiding by this policy. And for our session, which is on climate change, conflict, and peace, our session is, as you can understand by its name, contributing to the conference theme of climate change. And why we have this session? Because the exploration of the links between climate change and peace and conflict studies is repeated throughout the evolution of environmental peacebuilding research, especially since the release of the fourth IPCC report, which was characterized by a shift of focus to the climate and conflict link. And the main debate on environment and peace relations and environmental. And everyone, we are rather a crowded group here. Could you please keep an eye on your microphones? And in terms of our session today, this panel will bring panelists and experts who will address the links between climate change, conflict, and peace in different contexts through specific research questions, various country cases, approaches, and findings to further advance the debates and research in this field. And our panelists will focus on the positive linkages of climate change and peace practices in terms of climate and peace nexus. And also we will focus on conflict drivers at different points for RED+ projects. And we will also examine the evolution of different epistemological approaches through the lens of pragmatic pluralism. So within this framework, today we have 3 presentations with our panels, which I will introduce them. And I would like to kindly remind our panelists about being strict to their presentation time while presenting. I will inform you through the chat box while 5 minutes left and 2 minutes left, and I may jump in if necessary. And after the presentations, we will have a question and answer part for 30 minutes, which hopefully will be enough time for our panelists and audience to engage and interact. And our audience, your contributions and inputs are so valuable. So chat will be open and visible to everyone. Please do not hesitate to use it, ask your questions, share your insights, and add your comments. And before go through the presentations, as I mentioned before, we are a crowded group here, so please keep an eye on your microphones. And in terms of camera, it's always good to see some faces. And if you have any technical issues, we have our tech support, Chef, John, and Anna. Thank you guys for being here and helping us. So let's get started. Our first presentation is called Tipping from Climate Conflict Nexus to Climate Peace Nexus, which will be delivered by Jürgen Scheffran. So Jürgen Scheffran is a professor of geography and chair of the research group Climate Change and Security in the Cluster of Excellence and the Center of Earth System Research and Sustainability at the University of Hamburg. After his physics PhD, he held positions at the University of Marburg, Technical University of Darmstadt, University of Illinois, and the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. He was involved in projects for the United Nations, the German Office of Technology Assessment, and the Expert Commission on the Causes of Forced Migration of the German government. His research fields include security risks and conflicts of climate change and climate policy, land use and human migration, water, energy, food nexus, and rural-urban coastal interaction, sustainability science and complex system modeling in the Anthropocene, technology assessment, and international security. Professor Scheffran, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Buket, for the kind introduction and organizing this panel. Let me share my screen. I hope you can see everything. As you can imagine, the topic is about the climate conflict nexus, but also the climate peace nexus and the possible transition to this. This is based on research within the research group Climate Change and Security at the University of Hamburg. First of all, to give an overview, I'm talking on the one hand on the vicious circles of the climate conflict nexus and the possible compounding risks as well as tipping points in this interaction. And as climate change, there's a possible multiplier of conflict risks and pathways and a cycle of violence in fragile societies and regional hotspots. On the other hand, on the possibility of having virtuous circles for a climate peace nexus to use synergies of possible linkages between different policy fields and using sensitive governance leverages for transformation to sustainable peace. This is also about the multi-scale connections of the different actors in this field, movements, communities, business, governments, as well as transnational initiatives, and the evolving practices of environmental peace building through different activities like cooperation or participation. And the question is whether there can be a transition from the climate conflict to a climate peace nexus. First of all, we have a complex interaction, as you see from these 4 boxes. We have the climate system on the one hand, the natural resources in green, we have human security in orange, and societal stability and instability in red colors. And there are multiple connections and interactions here through the coupling factors such as environmental vulnerability and human vulnerability, as well as climate sensitivity and conflict sensitivity. The question is in which direction this evolves. When climate change is increasing, there could be the red crisis pathway towards security risk, instability, displacement, violence, and conflict, but there could be also the other pathway of risk avoidance, adaptation, sustainability, conflict resolution, and environmental peace building. And this is the action window we are facing. This was studied in a paper published in Nature based on expert assessment, looking at the interaction between conflict risk on the left-hand side and climate change risk on the right-hand side. And you see there are several connections. Some of them are mutually enforcing each other, some are dampening each other, given here by the minus sign in the green color. And we have the role of government as well as groups in society to reduce risk and strengthen adaptation, and reducing the aggravating connection between climate and conflict risk. One result of this expert elicitation was that there are socioeconomic and factors that are most important or most influential in the past in driving conflict risk, as well as low state capability or intergroup inequality and other factors, where climate variability is seen by the expert as a very low contributing factor in the past, but has high uncertainty, as you see on the right columns. Well, the question is, what is the estimated probability that climate leads to a substantial change in conflict risk and increase of conflict risk for 3 different scenarios? And according to this expert elicitation, in the past, it was about 5% contribution. And for the future 2-degree scenario, the orange columns it might be maybe 13% on average, and in red color for the 4-degree scenario, 26%, twice as much. But there's also the possibility there could be a negligible change or even a moderate decrease, although at lower numbers. One outcome was also the question, what is the estimated potential to reduce climate conflict risk in the future? And in the past as well, for the blue column, you see that according to this elicitation, on average, it was a little more than 25% in the past, possible reduction for the future scenarios between 25 and 30%, substantial decrease of the conflict risk. But there's also the possibility of a moderate decrease and a negligible change, despite substantial efforts in the future. But overall, there is a possibility for a reduction of conflict risk. What are the possible options for reducing conflict risk? On the one hand side, adaptation plays an important role, in particular if it uses vulnerability to both risks, and there could be various measures like crop insurance or training services that could be taken and to support livelihood security. It's also possible to take conflict mediation and peacekeeping measures and post-conflict aid. And on a third type of measure is building cooperation and peace to reduce the possible hazards from climate change. Well, we have this competition of pathways, as I showed in the beginning, between the red pathway and the green pathway. And depending on the situation where we're in and which climate stress activities emerge, as well as climate policy activities, as a competition between these two. It is possible to drive the development through tipping points towards the risk pathway in red or towards the peace building pathway in green. And even if you're on the downward slope, it may be possible to move towards the peace building, but it becomes more difficult the more you move down the crisis pathway. Looking at the world map, and you see there are many overlapping risks in hotspots, climate hotspots, in particular, several of them in the Mediterranean region, in Sahel zone, South Africa, as well as in South Asia, Central Asia, East Asia, as well as in Latin and North America and the Arctic zone. These are all different risks. Once it can be drought, it can be flooding, it can be also various climate tipping points in the system, which I don't want to explain in detail, but I want to mention some of them for the Mediterranean region as a case, an example. The Mediterranean region is already affected by various of these risks, in particular desertification and drought, as well as impact on major rivers and also coastal zones through sea level rise. And some of these issues have been studied in the CLISEC research group, for instance, with Janpeter Schilling, the climate change vulnerability to water resources and the social implications here. Vulnerability is a very important factor, depending on socioeconomic factors. There was a study led by Michael Link on the effect on transboundary relationship in the Nile River basin in times of climate change, possibly aggravating the tensions, in particular between Egypt and Ethiopia over the dam building. There was a paper led by Tobias Ide on pathways of water conflict in the MENA region, looking at several low-level violent conflicts related to water. And it showed that it depends on the social and political and economic embedding of these water-related conflicts. And there was a study led by Miguel Rodriguez about identifying transboundary tipping points in the Jordan River basin based on a transdisciplinary approach involving actors from these regions and finding conditions also for co-creation of cooperative water management between these different actors. The interesting thing is following the Arab Spring about 10 years ago, we saw an evolving chain of different interactions in this region, which are on the one hand based on the conflict and the dissatisfaction in this region of the population with the respective governance, which then led to some protests and violent conflict, aggravated also by food price increases, possibly related to weather extremes, but to other factors. And there were some major violent conflicts, such as the Syrian civil war, and there was a lot of discussion whether drought was a factor here. In any case, independent of the amount of climate change here, some resulted in transboundary effects, such as migration patterns leading towards Europe and contributing to the so-called refugee crisis. And there was a lot of discussion after 2015 and a lot of crisis also about the role of terrorism and right-wing populism emerging in Europe and other countries. But this question is, what are other factors contributing here besides climate change? You see, globalization is an important external factor, as well as the policies and interventions of major powers like the European Union, the United States, Russia, as well as the United Nations. And it's possible to drive it more towards the climate peace nexus in the future with using multi-level adaptive governance, climate diplomacy, solar decarbonization, using synergies and the food, water, energy nexus, sustainable development, and environmental peace building. So this is an outlook into the future, and there have been some activities after the Arabic Spring where Germany was involved, the German government with a climate security dialogue, which was looking at the Mediterranean, as well as a science diplomacy activity where I was taking part, as well as several conferences and workshops looking at the role of renewable energy, and others are contributing to strengthen the capacities in this region. Well, another case where Janpeter Schilling was involved, and we did a case study in northwest Kenya around Lake Turkana, looking at the impact of climate change and water on the one hand side, as well as energy projects. Oil was discovered, as well as a major wind park was there, or has been built there. And both could have possibly contributed to the development of the region, but on the other hand, because they did not take the interest of the local communities into consideration, became conflicting factors, including the wind park. So renewable energy as such is not necessarily a developing and peace-building factor. It depends on certain conditions. It was published in a paper in Conflict Security Development. Well, we're looking at the interaction between violence multiplier factors and violence preventing factors. Some time ago, with Tobias Ede and Janpeter Schilling, in the so-called spiral of violence. And the violence multiplying factors are, for instance, socioeconomic marginalization on the left-hand side, oil revenues, refugees, and divisions between farmers and herders, and climate change and resource scarcity. But there could be also violence preventing factors. In Kenya and Sudan in particular, good governance, human development, climate adaptation, and resource sharing, as well as certain agreements. The question is whether it goes up the spiral or down the spiral. This is the main question. Coming back to this graph that I showed on this complex interaction between the four boxes, climate change, natural resources, human security, and societal stability, it's well possible to different policies to drive this towards more the climate peace nexus. For instance, protecting and preserving the natural resource base. This is a very important factor here. To reduce emissions and improve resource efficiency is a very important factor. Then sustainable development of welfare and adaptive capacity, participation of the local population in cooperation, dispute resolution, a fair power distribution, climate justice and law, as well as reducing the instabilities and conflicts to conflict management and multi-scale governance and environmental peace building. So all these different policies could be interacting in a positive, constructive way, leading towards a climate peace nexus. This deserves more attention than the climate conflict nexus. Well, regarding how the policies are implemented, this depends on, of course, the political support. And we have seen a lot of movements around the world on fighting against resource extraction, climate change, and environmental destruction. And their success in the future will be important, of course, to drive it towards the climate peace nexus, as well as legal mechanisms like the ecocide activity to declare environmental crimes, ecocide, and also examples like the recent case against Bolsonaro and destroying the rainforest by indigenous people in the rainforest, and as well as the global move towards climate lawsuits, such as the successful case in the Dutch Supreme Court to drive the government towards keeping the climate goals. Well, another thing that was studied is the environmental peace building, and there was a paper on resilience and environmental security led by Janpeter Schilling on environmental protection in certain cases, such as collective rice production in Nepal, shrimp farming in Bangladesh, or the Eco-Peace is Good Water Neighbor project between Israel, Palestine, and Jordan actors, stakeholders. On the one hand, other side, migration is not necessarily a problem. It can be part of the solution, in particular if there's co-development between North and South. And there was we studied the role of migrants in self-help groups in Senegal, Morocco, to develop projects for renewable energy, water, electrification, and so on, as well as the program against drought to build capacities. It's all about capacity building with the help of migration and migrants. Okay, finally, I want to come to the end. Coming back to my old idea, whether we can move the conflict nexus with environment destruction and underdevelopment, which is built on this triangle of violence, growth, and power, towards a positive nexus of peace, sustainability, and development that I came up in the 1990s. Okay, this is my last slide. This is summarizing some of the activities that we can move towards a successful transformation, which requires climate-sensitive and conflict-sensitive mitigation and adaptation to minimize the conflict potentials and avoid land use conflicts with local communities over, including development projects and renewable energy projects. So this should be avoided, as well as strategic metals needed for renewable energy, and avoid the side effects to realize the co-benefits and the synergies with the power of the institutions. We can develop further multilateral institutions across all levels, from local to global, and a framework of sustainable peace as well as environmental peace, and connect both strategies with each other. And with this, I want to finish my presentation, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Scheffran. It was so valuable to see that while witnessing these devastating effects of climate change, we also have some risks, but also opportunities at multi-scale and regional scale as well. So we are going through our second panelist. So which is actually, it is called, it's a different approach. It's about RED+ project. So it's called RED+ Driver of Conflict or Tool for Environmental Peacebuilding, which will be delivered by Janpeter Schilling. Janpeter Schilling is the scientific director of the Peace Academy Rhineland-Palatinate, Germany. He holds a class topper junior professorship for land use conflicts at the University of Koblenz-Landau, and his research focuses on conflict resources and environmental climate change. And also our other panelists are Rebecca Froese, who is a researcher and PhD candidate at the Peace Academy Rhineland-Palatinate and the research group Land Use Conflicts at the University of Koblenz-Landau as well. And for her dissertation, she is researching on the nexus of social cohesion and land system change with a focus on transformative measures and land system conflicts at the border of Brazil, Bolivia, and Peru. And other panelist is Rowan Alusiola. She's a master's student in environmental science at the University of Koblenz-Landau as well, and an associate fellow at the Peace Academy Rhineland-Palatinate. She's also an alumni of Alexander von Humboldt Fellowship for International Climate Protection. She has 10 years of practical work experience in developing, managing, and mentoring programs and policies in the East Africa region as an environmental specialist. Professor Schilling, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Buket. And just to clarify, so Rowan and I will be presenting, but Rebecca is also in the session. And it's nice to have a few, maybe 1 or 2 more minutes now. So we'll look at RED+, both as a driver of conflict. So I think that's fits really nicely to what Jürgen has just said, that also climate mitigation efforts could potentially cause conflict, or could they be tool for peace building? So that's the question that we want to address in this slide. Well, I hope that my slides will continue at some point. There we are. This is how we set up the content. I will go until RED+ and conflict, and then Rowan will continue with the more of the conservation side of forest conservation and the nexus to peace. There we go. So we published a paper recently which focused on this first part of REDD+ conflict and understanding the pathways between forest projects and social conflicts. So that one is already published, and I've shared it also with the organizers of the conference. So you might find it there, or you just look up the title, it's open access, so you can access it there. That is the first part of our presentation. The other one is the ongoing part of the research. That is more trying to look at what is the potential of conservation projects, and especially forest conservation projects, and how can it contribute to peace. Just briefly on the method. So what we were doing for the first one, we basically looked at almost all publications. I wouldn't say all publications, but everything that had REDD+ somewhere in the title or the topic in the Web of Science, and then had some combinations with conflict and other factors that would come up that would be relevant to our research. And then we really boiled it down to 8 case studies that we identified or that we analyzed in more detail to identify what we called conflict pathways. And these were the criteria that we used. Now, for the second part, we were looking at peace pathways. And we so far have only identified 4 cases where it was clear enough to analyze that, but that is still going ongoing research. And yeah, the second paper will focus more on that. I'll just skip over this. This is basically, as a geographer, I have to show some maps where the conflict case studies. So we had some in East Africa, we had one in Indonesia, Vietnam, and Panama, but you can follow that up in the paper as well. As a framework, we used the political ecology lens to basically analyze these conflict drivers, and we were trying to look at the different events that would then lead to the conflict, and we distinguished those from key conflict drivers that we were seeing in the case studies would be contributing to conflicts. So let's come to the most interesting part, to the results. These are just 2 examples of the 8 conflict pathways that we identified. So these are individual papers that we looked at. And here you can see that sometimes REDD+ influenced early on the conflict pathway and leading to responses in the community, and then either creating new conflict or aggravating existing one in the second case. But it could also be, as here in the Holmes paper, that REDD+ interacts fairly late in the process, and there were other steps before that were driving the conflict pathways. And you can also see differences in the underlying conflict drivers. And I think the most important slide from my side is this one. Based on these case studies and the overall literature, we identified 6 main conflict drivers. And these are not really surprising. Those of you familiar with the REDD+ project could have guessed some of them at least. But I think it's important to see that it's really in many cases, the REDD+ project led to injustices and restriction of full access and control over the forest resource for the local communities. The new forest governments did not mean that local communities were empowered. I think that was something that Jürgen was suggesting could happen, but it does not happen, or it did not happen in our case. And the relationships in several of our cases really deteriorated between the key actors, particularly the local communities and the project proponents and the government. And then several community members felt excluded and weren't able to fully participate in the project. And then there's a 4th dimension, and here I can just briefly make a reference to the case study that Jürgen just mentioned. We were doing in northern Kenya on the wind park. People, when they see so many investments coming into region, they have expectations. They had the expectation to be employed, that their lives are improving. And if that's not the case, then the people are disappointed, and they're more likely to resist or to protest against any external project. So I think that's quite a key component, and more research, I think, needs to be focused on that, the way project implementers create local expectations which they cannot meet in the end. And then land tenure. In this conference, we already heard a lot about land tenure. There was a fascinating panel yesterday on forests, and their land tenure did play quite a role there. So the question of who owns, accesses, and benefits from the land is quite an important one. And then if you already have conflict in a region, and then you bring in a REDD+ project, or for that matter, any other project, it's more likely that this conflict will be aggravated rather than mitigated or reduced. And with that, I think I still have some time for Rowan. So Rowan, I think these will come up. Well, I've already talked a little bit about those, but these will come up again in the second part. So I hand over to you, Rowan.
Thank you, Janpeter. And thank you to the panelists and everybody who is in the meeting. So for us to be able to answer the question, can REDD+ or conservation be used as a tool for peace building, we decided to look through the literature. And of course, we were looking at three major things. We were looking at the initial context. What was the initial context? When did the parties decide to engage in peace building? And what mechanisms were they using for them to ensure that there is peace building? And also, what was the outcome? How did the community perceive the outcome? And so, as you can see, we came up with the peace pathways. And through the peace pathways, you can see they're totally different. And this was different because of the different conflicts that were in different places, the different stakeholders which were involved, and also the difference in the depth of the conflicts that we had in the different regions. And so, but apart from the differences, also there were similarities, because initially there were initial consultation meetings, there were trainings which were happening. There were also communities coming together and forming groups, additional groups being formed, and basically people were being strengthened apart from just being capacity built. And through the strengthening, you could see now more conflict happening, because now people have been more empowered and they're realizing their rights, they know their power, and we had new conflicts now emerging from the process of the conflict. And here we have now those people coming and deciding we need to come up with other new conflict mitigation strategies. Next slide, please, Peter. And so in the different regions that we were looking, the cases that we were looking, the approaches were totally different. And this is very important because we realize that when conflict happen in these regions, we do not have to come up with a blanket or the same peace building measures for you to be able to mitigate the conflict that are there. So first of all, there was adoption of traditional customs and informal negotiations between communities. And this is very important because normally we assume that these communities do not have their own traditional way or their customs in which they can be able to mitigate conflict. But it's very important for us to look at the traditions. What are the traditions of these communities? What are the norms? How have they been doing these things initially? The networking and village rules also are very, very strong in these cases because these networks were built and they were strengthened. And through the strengthening, they could now negotiate on behalf of the other community members. And the most interesting network that I found in this case study was the religious network. And we all understand that in all these areas, people believe in, some God or in some power. And so religion works very like a magic because everybody will want to listen to the religious leaders. And for example, in this one, there was ordination of trees. And so when trees are blessed or ordinated, people will fear going to cut them, or people will fear coming up with conflicts, starting conflicts, because these have been already ordained. And then we had issue on participatory action research, and this was very key, and this was used especially in governance issues, where we have governance issues and people were taken through reflection and just looking back and seeing what are the issues that we have, how can we be able to come up with proper issues, and in a participatory manner, come together as a group and come up with new laws and rules and regulations for the group. And this mostly worked well on community forest user group. Capitalization on social ties also was very important because when conflict happened, people are suspicious. People do not trust others. But when a party brings in people who are familiar to a community, and the community will easily welcome them and say, yes, this is our person, and we can be able to listen to them and hear out what they're talking about. Orientation of power resources also was key here, because when we have conflict, it's because we have few people who are in power, who are holding on power. But it's important for the power to be oriented to different people so that everybody else can feel that they are being part of the conservation of the programs which are ongoing. Next slide, Janpeter, please. And then also preempting conflict and conflict mediation also was very important, because in communities you already have rules, leadership in communities which have been mediating and controlling basically conflict in those regions. So it's very important for us to use those already village or community-led groups which have already been formed for us to come up to mediate or come up with peace building. And finally, adaptive learning and deliberation. It was very important here because we saw the community and the researchers coming together, forming groups and learning through the process so that they can come up with peace building initiatives. So in conclusion, we are saying that REDD+ can cause and aggravate conflicts. But at the same time, REDD+ and conservation efforts can become a tool for environmental peace building, but this can only happen if the local communities, their rights, livelihoods, and benefits are placed at the center of all the REDD+ and conservation programs. Secondly, conservation between governments and companies and local communities can lead to equity and benefit sharing and land tenure. And finally, if conflict management strategies are jointly developed and applied. Thank you.
Thanks so much for this presentation, Rowan and Professor Schilling. And it was really nice to see that how the REDD+ and this program's potential to contribute to peace building, which was hardly being analyzed, and how it can be utilized in terms of approaches to peace building. And we are coming through our last panelist, last but not least, Professor Cedric de Koning. He's a research professor at the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs, Center on UN and Global Governance. He holds a PhD from the Department of Philosophy at the University of Stellenbosch. His research focuses on strengthening the resilience and sustainability of social ecological systems under pressure from climate change, conflict, and other stressors. And today, his presentation called Beyond Critique Towards a Pragmatic Pluralism in Climate Security and Environmental Peacebuilding Research. Professor de Koning, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I'm actually delivering or sharing with you a paper that was co-authored between myself and my colleague Paul Beaumont. Unfortunately, he's fell ill, so he is not able to co-present with me. Our paper is kind of an advanced stage, not yet published, so I'll post my email just now, and I'll really appreciate any feedback that you may have. It is entitled, or provisionally entitled, Beyond Critique, the Complexity Inherent in Social Ecological Systems Requires Epistemic Pluralism in Climate Security Research. So our focus is on research and research methodology. And I would start by saying that over the last 2 decades, climate security and environmental peacebuilding have become increasingly prominent, of course, in international fora. Actually, for example, later today, a couple of fellow researchers from Africa, China, India, and Europe will brief the incoming independent expert group on climate security at the Security Council on the research evidence underpinning the interlinkages between climate change and peace and security. So even at the level of the Security Council, this is becoming more prominent. However, despite the more than 1,000 peer-reviewed articles and books that have been published on these topics, Policymakers will be disappointed if they expect a straight answer to the question, does climate change cause conflict? In this paper, Paul and I argue that uncertainty around climate security links should be understood as characteristics of complex social ecological systems rather than a problem that can be fully resolved. So rather than striving to eliminate uncertainty, we suggest that researchers need to learn to cope with it. And to this end, our paper advances three principles for guiding scholarly practice when investigating complex phenomenon. Firstly, to recognize epistemological uncertainty. Secondly, to embrace epistemological diversity. And thirdly, to practice humility and dialogue across differences. And taken together, we call this ethos epistemological pluralism, whereby scholars self-consciously recognize the limits of their chosen epistemology for understanding the climate security nexus and engage with other practices without attempting to usurp them. Can we go to the next slide, please? So while policymakers may seek simple guidance and will end up being frustrated by the debates, claims, and counterclaims around especially the causal links between climate change and conflict, our argument is that amidst all of this heat, light is emerging. If we accept that the crudest climate change and causes conflict theories are now dead in the water, it becomes apparent that state-of-the-art is increasingly in meta-agreement about the nature of the relationship between climate change and security, namely that it's contextual, socially mediated, and above all complex. And I think we saw this from the previous presentations in this panel and also throughout this whole conference. So while it may sound counterintuitive to the policymaker, we argue that this recognition of the inherent complexity and thus unpredictability of the climate security nexus provides a firmer basis for both knowledge production and policymaking. In short, once one recognizes that both social and ecological systems are ontologically complex, and therefore the futility of trying to identify universal law-like relationships within and among them, it enables scholars and policymakers to concentrate their energies on how best to cope with this reality. And next slide, please. So this is where we then introduce and focus in the paper on complexity. And for those not familiar with complexity theory, we offer a brief introduction. Sorry, if we can just go back to the previous slide. I think I skipped a slide. Thank you. So Paul and I take this emerging consensus as our starting point. We argue that if we accept that climate security relationships are inherently complex and thus never fully knowable, what does this mean for the future of climate security and environmental peacebuilding research and practice? And to answer this question, we draw upon insights from complexity theory. And whilst climate security and environmental peace research has increasingly acknowledged the complexity of its object of analysis and calls for modeling complexity has become commonplace, it has really systematically utilized complexity theory to inform its meta-theoretical assumptions about how climate security and environmental peace research should be conducted. And so we argue that complexity theory provides the ontological basis for an explicitly epistemological pluralism characterized by humility, diversity, and dialogue. And we argue that embracing the principles of epistemological pluralism, rather than merely pluralism of method, offers the best guard against tunnel vision when making sense of these complex phenomena. And now we can go to the complicated versus complex slide. Thank you. So for those of you that may not be that familiar with complexity theory, we offer a brief introduction in the paper, and I'll do an even briefer introduction now. But we argue that social and ecological systems are a particular type of holistic system that have the ability to adapt and that demonstrates emergent properties, including self-organizing behavior. Paul Sellier explained that such systems emerge and are maintained as a result of the dynamic and non-linear interactions of their elements based on the information available to them locally, and that these systems are shaped by the interactions of the elements within their environment, as well as from the modulated feedback they receive from other elements in the system. And one way to highlight the unique characteristics of complex systems is to contrast them with complicated systems. A complicated system can potentially be fully understood and predicted, provided sufficient information is available. So, for instance, designing, building, and launching a rocket into space is highly complicated, but once it is mastered, the same process can be repeated with a reasonable degree of certainty and predictability. In contrast, non-linearity plays a critical role in the emergence and self-regulation of complex adaptive systems. And as social ecological systems are highly dynamic, non-linear, and emergent, complexity theory contends that it's not possible to find general laws that will help us predict with certainty how a particular society or community will react to changes in the environment. And this uncertainty is an intrinsic quality of complex system. It's not the result of imperfect knowledge. So these insights from complexity theory for climate security and environmental peacebuilding research suggest that our ability to fully understand complex systems is inherently limited. In other words, I would say the next time you hear somebody say that what we do is not rocket science, you should tell them that environmental peacebuilding is way more complex than rocket science. Next slide, please. So we draw 4 interconnected implications from complexity theory for the field of climate security research. First, a recognition of complexity implies an unavoidable uncertainty around knowledge, and in particular, the possibility of finding universally valid knowledge across time and space. Second, complexity theory suggests that the best way to cope with uncertainty is by self-consciously fostering a diversity of approaches to avoid unduly narrowing the researcher's perspectives a priori. And third, if we accept that the climate security nexus is complex, then it warrants not just the pluralism of method or theory or discipline, but an explicit commitment to epistemological pluralism. And fourth, practicing epistemological pluralism requires a self-conscious effort to conduct dialogue across differences, such that cross-fertilization can take place without integration or usurpation. So taken together, we suggest that complexity theory provides the grounds to strive for an explicitly epistemological pluralism characterized by humility and dialogue. Next slide, please. So when we then go on to diagnose whether and to what extent pluralism practiced by climate security reflects these ideals and identify where and how they fall short. In order to generate a big picture view of the extent to which positivist and constructivist research coexist and engage one another, we first conducted a bibliographic analysis to map the field. We used Scartosi's bibliographic data set of 640 climate security research items and coded those published after 2010 as either positivist or broadly constructivist. And visualizing the climate security citation network with nodes scaled around according to the number of citations highlights how positive scholarship dwarfs the constructivist scholarship in terms of brute numbers of articles and number of citations. Some scattered non-positive research clusters exist, but they are very much asymmetrical in terms of the number of citations. Nonetheless, this mapping provides an empirical basis for the claim that there is what Levine and McCord calls a plurality of research, even if it suggests an imbalance of impact and perhaps influence. In terms of the intra and intercamp engagement measured by co-citation, positivists engage more with positivists. Meanwhile, the constructivists are less inclined to cluster together, emerging as islands somewhat disconnected from each other as well as from positivists. And whilst this bibliographic network analysis offers a useful snapshot of the field, mapping citations can only take us so far in assessing the quality of the pluralism practiced and envisaged by climate security research. Bibliographic analysis cannot shed light on how these different camps understand pluralism, nor the quality of pluralism they endorse. And so in the next section of the paper, we thus zoom in upon the network's constituent parts to examine the quality of the engagement. Next slide, please. So in this slide, we look at the quality of the engagement, and I'm not going to explain this slide in more detail because I see I'm running out of time, and I would like to rather just conclude in the next slide with our main recommendations. So if we move to the last slide. As our mapping exercise research literature shows, epistemological pluralism is to some extent already present in the field. However, as our analyses have revealed, there's a great deal of scope for improvement. And so we make 5 recommendations for advancing epistemological pluralism. The first and easiest involved researchers taking care with how they refer to research undertaken by the different epistemologies. Second, we propose that climate security scholarship and environmental peacebuilding research improve, that the scholars involved in this improve their epistemological reflexivity. This implies reading up on the epistemology and methodology of the other side in their own words, rather than going by second-hand interpretations. The third and fourth recommendation concern increasing degrees of collaboration. The most straightforward is to solicit feedback on draft papers to those working in different epistemologies. Fourth, climate security scholars would benefit from co-authoring with those who ordinarily work in different or in another epistemology, and learning how to navigate the meta-theoretical differences when they inevitably arise. So co-authoring across epistemologies will prove challenging, but we wager that such learning by doing is the optimum strategy for fostering mutual understanding and facilitating cross-pollination across epistemological camps. So to conclude, our article has drawn upon complexity theory to advance a set of normative principles for guiding scholarly practice when investigating complex phenomena, namely recognizing fundamental epistemological uncertainty, embracing epistemological diversity, and practicing humility and dialogue across difference. And taken together, we call this ethos epistemological pluralism. Indeed, our core argument is that a diversity of epistemologies offers the most productive means of producing knowledge about climate security and environmental peacebuilding. Thank you very much, and apologies for going slightly over time.
No apologies needed, Professor De Koning. And thank you so much for your presentation. And I think it became a conference motto that environmental peacebuilding is much more complex than rocket science. So we should add this to the conference effort, I believe. And it was so important to see different theoretical frameworks, and especially how epistemological approaches and how you put the pragmatic pluralism is possible to put into practice in climate security and environmental peacebuilding. And thanks so much. Thanks so much for, thank you for our panelists. And right now I'm opening the question and answers part. Our audience, you can ask your questions or share your insights or comments, either by taking the floor, by using, you can raise your hand by using the reactions icon, or you can also use the chat. So. And I would like to go with first question, if it's appropriate. So for our all panelists, I would like to ask that since the beginning of this research, the links between environment and conflict, it has been accompanied by critical questions, and core criticism was that there is no clear correlation between them. So the lack of the empirical evidence, and this was the core criticism, and also the lack of the collaboration between practitioners and academics. So how do you see today this criticism? How is your insight about the collaboration between practitioners and academia? Yeah, please, Professor Schilling.
Thanks, Buket. So I think there has been a change, and I think this was also discussed yesterday in the panel on looking back and looking forward on environmental peace building. I think the so-called practitioners, so if you want to refer to peace building and development organizations, are more and more recognizing this complexity that both Jürgen and Cedric have now also mentioned in their presentation. But the problem is they have to work on the ground with this complexity, and they can't do everything. They don't have the resources, and they might have more and more of the knowledge, but they have to focus on something. And I think that I was in another session with somebody from the World Bank, and she was basically arguing, we know it's complex, but we have to focus on something. They can't work on everything. So the question is now, how do they prioritize? And I think that is slowly changing over the year. But I mean, I've worked in a peace building organization for some year, and they have to check so many boxes, from gender, from conflict sensitivity, from development, and so forth. So I don't think there is an easy solution to that, but at least what I'm seeing is that they're more and more recognizing it. And of course, I think this conference here is a great platform for engagement between the academic world and the more practitioner-oriented and especially also policy world. So maybe not a clear answer, but I do see some progress there over the past years. Thank you.
Thank you. And Professor Scheffran?
Yeah, I'm grateful to Cedric for raising the importance of complexity. That's an issue I've been interested in since 40 years, since my diploma thesis actually was on complexity theory. It was at the beginning of chaos theory in the early 80s. And since then, the field has substantially evolved. It's no longer so much in the natural sciences, including the diffusing into the social sciences. The interesting thing with complexity is that humans deal with complexity by developing routines. To keep things simple, and only when challenges emerge, they develop their behavior in a way that they're able to address and deal with this complexity. So, so one thing is you can study the simple routines of people, or you can deal with the complex ways of tackling challenges. And both are interesting, particularly the switch, when people switch from simple routines to complex challenges. And that, I think, is the interesting thing when you deal with conflict, because conflict is a highly complex way of social interaction. It's really putting a lot of pressure on us to deal with the conflict. And that's the interesting thing. I do not necessarily say that cooperation is more simple, because cooperation also needs certain mechanisms and routines, which can be very complex to deal with or to stabilize cooperation. But in any way, that linkage between complexity, conflict, and cooperation is a very interesting subject, in particular when you talk with climate. I think there's a lot of need for more research, in particular regarding the positive versus constructive approaches.
Thanks so much. Professor Decano?
Thank you very much. Yes, I mean, I think the research actually presented by Jürgen and Janpeter and their co-authors really show precisely this kind of challenging gap between maybe assumptions that policymakers make when they fund Red R programs, and then the reality of RED Plus programs, and the reality of how it unfolds and the implications that it have, and the way you have to deal with it. And I think what we're trying to say in our paper is that we need to accept that, you know, we cannot know beforehand exactly what the implications will be, and therefore we need to do while learning and learn while doing. We don't have to tell the practitioners it's complex, so you have to wait until the research. No, that's not what we're saying, but we're saying your methodology have to be different. You have to have an open-ended approach to, and a willingness to learn and adapt as you go along, and a specific methodology to support and process that. And then the other message I would like to share is that I see in this field, perhaps more than any other, a great interest among policymakers to actually learn from the research and to get feedback on what is happening. And in our work, we are very closely engaging with different UN entities and Security Council. And certainly in those areas, we see a constant engagement and interest in research and what the evidence say, and they have a wish to be guided by evidence in this field. Thank you.
And I see some questions in chat box. And first one is for you, Professor de Koning, from Hesta. The acknowledgement that environmental peace building is complex and needs a pluralist approach really resonates for me. Apart from taking this principle forward in research, it also seems important as a principle for community building and activism. But how could this be communicated to policymakers who make short-term decisions and need clear sound bites?
Yeah, this is always a challenge, of course. I think, first of all, on the challenge quickly, you know, I think the big problem is that many of the programs are driven by, you know, different interests. So one of them is programmatic. We have to spend the money within a year, and therefore there's a kind of a rush. There's different interests at stake, which make this more difficult. But on the other hand, I see more and more initiatives and programs willing to take adaptive approaches, adaptive peace building, adaptive governance in this area. I was just in actually, I think it was when this program started, one of the plenaries, we had a senior person from USAID who was speaking about how localization is now a major part, cross-cutting part of their work. So I think I see more and more uptake in many of these kind of traditional donor and peace-building institutions, with a willingness to, and a recognition that there's a need to work with local communities, there's a need to adapt. So, and then of course, it's our role and the role of others working in this field to provide them with the instruments and tools to show them how they can use adaptive methodologies in ways that will not necessarily make it more costly or more timely, so that they can be convinced. And of course, we have to do the research to show that those adaptive approaches actually have the results that we propose.
Professor Scheffran, there's also a question for you. What do you think is necessary in terms of data measurements to gain a better understanding or even foster tipping dynamics towards the climate peace nexus?
Yeah, thank you very much, Rebecca, for this question. I think an important question issue is sensitivity. Sensitivity means how much one system or one agent responds to another system or agent, and how sensitive you are in your response. The stronger or bigger the sensitivity is, the stronger the response is. And this could lead to a possible, of course, reactivity in a way of solving problems, but could also lead to instability. And but looking at the sensitivity is the coupling between two variables, systems, or agents. And that is an important issue. For instance, let's take climate change and how sensitive we are to climate change. When it's getting warmer, we develop some mechanisms to reduce the sensitivity to heat. When it's getting colder, we try to reduce the sensitivity to cold. And this sensitivity can be possibly measured. Of course, there is it's something that you can measure in the medical sciences. In psychology, sensitivity is an important issue, but also in the social sciences, sensitivity is an important issue, how strong people respond to certain messages. And in the securitization debate, for instance, there is the assumption that an increase of climate change will lead to a strong response from the security establishment. So there is the assumption behind that, that the security establishment is sensitive to the messages and the impact of climate change, okay? So here sensitivity is one factor. You can go through the whole debate looking at this as sensitivity and how this can affect stability and instability. And I would say at this moment and this time, politics is not in a good position to deal both with sensitivity and complexity because they're through selection and election mechanisms, they're basically focusing on the simple messages, on the simple policies. And the simple policies fail in a complex world. So the big question is, how can politics be sensitive enough to find positive solutions to complex problems and adapt their simple messages and policies to the complex world? I think this is a big issue and a big question for the future because we're still living in an ever increasing complex world. Thank you.
I just wanted to add that I think this focus on the shift from a climate conflict to climate peace nexus is very interesting and very important. And when it comes to measuring, it's about what you measure. You know, the way you frame and identify indicators or other elements that you measure will influence the shift to a peace lens or away from a conflict or security lens. So I think just to emphasize and echo what Jürgen said, that our choice of focus is also very much influenced by what we choose to measure and who we engage with, of course. Thank you.
So much. Oh, please, Professor Schilling.
Yeah, I have a more general comment, I guess, on the climate security or climate conflict nexus, and that is that I think so far the field has too much neglected the adaptation to some degree, but the mitigation efforts and their conflict implication. These have been quite separate communities, and now they're slowly, I think, at least from my perspective, merging. But the conflicts that we'll be creating on the ground already now, but I think in the next coming decades, will be much more driven by mitigation efforts, large-scale mitigation efforts. And we're talking about wind parks, solar parks, and also REDD+ or other forms of conservation projects, rather than climate change, I think, because there is so much money. We just heard it in the last COP. There will be so much money coming into those. And I'll just give you, I mean, that's not a scientific evidence, but I can tell you a short anecdote. My wife is working for a book publisher, and her job is to make the company more sustainable. They need a lot of paper. Of course, books need paper. So her job was to find climate projects that offset this the footprint that they have. And obviously the boss wanted some forest project, and it was extremely difficult. I mean, she asked me now maybe to assist her a little bit to find a forest project where there weren't any like complications or negative or potential local externalities. And that basically shows that there's money going into this massively, but it is likely to be detrimental to the local population. We can say, okay, that's the trade-off that we have to get. But the more wind parks you build and the more solar parks you build, as Jürgen mentioned before, that doesn't mean that they will have a local positive effect. It is likely the other way around. And I think much more research should be focused on that, rather than if we have 1 degree more, we have that many more conflicts or not. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks so much. And thanks so much for your experience. Lindsay, please, and could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, hello, Lindsay Cook from the Quaker United Nations office. Many, many thanks for these presentations. And I just wanted to refer back to what was just being said about large scale projects. There is significant research coming out particularly through the Human Rights Council. If you look at the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment, to look at how human rights-based approaches make for better climate action. And I do hope, if that's not in your research, that you can refer to some of those studies, because they're very important. It's something that we push very much, talking to policymakers, how you do climate policy well and how you can do it badly. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Professor Dekani?
Thank you very much. I just wanted to follow on what Janpeter said, and I think what Lindsay now said, of course, is very relevant to that as well. That I absolutely agree that a major focus of our work going forward should be about the kind of risk of conflict, of violent conflict related to mitigation and adaptation, because not only will there be a lot of money, that money will be spent with great urgency to meet our targets, right? So there's a danger that there will be a sense of urgency, a sense that this is a technical exercise, that, you know, it will be about environmental science or other expertise, and that people will not be sensitive enough to the social impact. So that I agree 100% with. But at the same time, I want to say that this also provides us with a significant opportunity, because we have all this funding that will now be in future coming on stream and be spent on mitigation and adaptation. And if we do become involved from an environmental peacebuilding perspective on how that funding is directed, we can perhaps help to influence that funding is directed in ways that build resilience, that build social cohesion, and that sustain peace. So it's very much looking at that diagram that Jürgen had up earlier about whether you're going up or down, whether you are building peace or whether you are contributing to conflict. And this is where I think a very important focus for us all can be over the next 30, 40 years, to try and steer our knowledge to help guide these projects towards peace rather than towards conflict.
Thanks, Rowan.
Thank you so much. I thank you for the other panelists. I agree totally with all the comments that I have made. But again, I think it's important going forward that we really involve the local community even in this programming, because you find that, yeah, we have these very beautiful programs that come in, but without consultation with the local community, not really knowing what the local community wants or the needs for the local community, they are bound to fail. So it's very important for us also to involve the local community and have these programs as complex as possible, so that they have a mitigation perspective, a livelihood perspective, a conservation perspective. But again, this should come from the local community or the stakeholders at the local level who are really going to get involved in them. Thank you.
Thank you. And also we have a question from Sharon for our panelists. Is it possible, or can we make it possible, to slow down processes in order to do sensitive assessments to make our best effort to sustain peace and be aware of potential impacts? So, okay, Professor Dekani.
I think Janpeter was actually before me, but I'll just drop the floor and say that I think it's very important to slow down, to create space for community engagement, to leave space and create room for this adaptive process for learning as we go along. But as we have acknowledged, there's at the same time these pressures, this urgency from the policymaker perspective to act with urgency, to spend the money they have. And so I think it's a constant dynamic and tension. And one leverage that I think we could use is about the fact that there's also a wish from the policymakers that their programs are effective and efficient. And the more we can link performance to and results to the time that it takes to get it right, the more we can convince them to perhaps to slow down, to make sure, and also to convince them that the urgency, the speed, will create, bigger negative effects and more unintended consequences. and that you need time to pick those up and to adapt to those. So that's maybe, again, that requires a strong focus on monitoring and learning whilst doing. But that could be one way in which we can try and influence the speed. Thank you.
Just to add to that, I think that it's in response to both Sharon and Lindsay here. I think the organizations are under great pressure anyway, because their timeframes usually just a couple of years that they have to implement a project. So it's not only that they, companies want to spend the money quite fast, so they want to reduce their carbon footprint, but it's also the way that projects and the donor community works. They look at projects. If you have a 3-year project, that's already very long. 5 years is almost impossible. Usually they are shorter if they're not very large scale projects. So it's very hard to engage with the local communities with this kind of time frame. And I mean, I'm just seeing that comment by Lindsay. I totally agree with you that the human rights based approaches are there, and they've been there for many years. And we all have this do no harm. We all have the guardrails, the safety, the social guardrails. REDD+ is an excellent example of that. But the problem is that they are hardly implemented, and there's hardly the local capacity to implement and to check on them. And I think we do have it the wrong way around. It shouldn't be, let's measure how many trees we have and how what big of a carbon sink we have. We should have it the way around. Okay, what problems that the community has, or what are the issues that they are raising? Address those first, and then we can maybe have some carbon benefits on top of that. But of course, that's not the logic that the climate community has. The climate community is looking to maximize the carbon sink and is less interested in the local communities. But as Rowan pointed out, if we don't get the local communities on board, the projects will fail. And I think that's also something we as researchers should look at more, is like, what kind of actual climate projects were actually successful. And I think it will be quite sobering what we find.
Yes, I can only confirm what Janpeter and Cedric said, and I appreciate both questions. We are living in the Anthropocene of incredible acceleration. Everything is accelerated. Many factors are growing exponentially, not only the pandemic, but also energy use and other factors. And I think the problem creation needs to slow down. On the other hand, the problem solution are too slow. And they may be increased. So it's a competition between the problem creation and problem solution. There are different speeds, and they can't have to come to the same speed. Basically, the speed has to be adapted on both ends. And this has to do with the global process as well as the local processes. I agree that the global processes can be only solved locally, because climate change, for instance, is created by local activities. It's affecting local communities through the global system. So basically, at the beginning and at the end of this global process are the local communities. And the global speed and the local speed have also to be adapted in a sense. And this is an interesting question, how the local solutions can keep up with the global problems. And human rights are very important for that, because it's a part of the empowerment process of local communities. Is a human rights question. And in one of my slides, I mentioned the relevance of law and legal issues. We see that some of the communities are now making lawsuits against globally acting companies, for instance, who are contributing to climate change. And there was an important a lawsuit last year from the highest German court. Not sure whether it was recognized internationally, because they forced the German government to take faster action on climate change, because it's against the German constitution, they say, because climate change is violating basic human rights, also basic rights according to the German constitution. And so law is important and can be used as an instrument to empower people.
Thanks so much. Rowan?
Thank you also everybody for your comments, which are very interesting. What I just want to put forward is, yeah, we are looking at programs and you're saying, yeah, these programs are 5 years, they're short term, and when they go, the programs are over and we go back to the same issues. But again, I think we need to ask ourselves, why does this happen? Why do we have these programs and all of a sudden the programs end and we're going back to the same vicious circle of conflict? And I think it's very important for ownership of these programs. And again, I'll go back to the point of having the community as key stakeholders of these programs, because if you have them as key stakeholders, there'll be ownership of these programs. And as they own up the programs, when the projects are over, these communities are going to continue with the programs even without the donors. So it's very important for us to be very focused, even though we have the complexity in them, but again, make sure that the communities have the capacity to continue even after we have left. The communities have the ability to say, yes, this is our program, this is what we have been able to do, and we are going to start seeing changes. Yes, I'm not saying they're not happening, they're happening, but they're happening on very small scale. So we really need to upgrade this so that we are involving more communities, they're being part and parcel of this, they're owning up so that we can see after the programs, after everything has ended, the communities continue with it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rowan. And I also couldn't agree more. It is not just about giving them a chair as a decision maker, but allowing them to create their own future, and so important. And there is a question to Professor De Koning from Rebecca. What you presented seems to have a connotation of a post-colonial approach, in particular when addressing diversity on different knowledges. How can your argument of accepting complexity as a coping strategy trigger repairing global relationships?
Thank you, Rebecca. And I see Freya also asked a similar question, and I think Khan's question also relates to the same. I would say that a complexity approach that recognizes that there is no, one universal explanation or truth that can be determined, and therefore gives some kind of a priority or superior knowledge to, the expert that has the knowledge. And this moving away from this idea of, the expert coming to a community and helping the community or advising how to implement, with the community being kind of the passive implementers, moving away from that. And I think complexity really helps us to understand also why or let me say the importance of the self-organization of the communities itself in order to generate and for emergent sustainable solutions to come about. So for me, in my own work, I think complexity has really helped me to see and embrace the importance of the strong agency of communities, of societies in determining their own path. And so for me, this is very much linked to a kind of a strong emphasis on self-determination, where knowledge needs to emerge from the engagement with those communities and societies, where they have to have the primary agency. So for me, they are not stakeholders, but they are the primary agents in bringing about change. And others, maybe a donor or NGO, could help to facilitate that change. And so I think in that sense, for me, it also resonates very much to a kind of a decolonized approach to peace building, where the let's say the West, where a lot of the current finance exists that will be involved in climate financing and so on, have to accept that they do not have the solutions and do not own the answers. That has to come out through an engagement. And so that's why I'm emphasizing this adaptive approach, and why I'm emphasizing learning whilst doing. And with that, I think the respect, the dignity of everybody involved as equals is very important, as well as informing this processes.
Professor Scheffran?
Yes, I agree with this. that we don't need only one type of knowledge, which in the past has been mostly the Western way of creating science and knowledge. So it's the question is, how can we increase diverse knowledge? But even more important is diverse processes of knowing. Knowledge is basically the result, and knowing is the process. And this can be also done in a co-creation way, but this should not be dominated by one side. Co-creation should be basically on an equal footing, but we have inequity, we have injustice, we have unbalance. How shall we deal with this inequity? And how does self-organization work if there is imbalance? And I think the main point is that the West should give up its colonial attitudes that have been built up over hundreds of years and move into a direction of removing restraints for self-organization. I think that maybe the most important part from the West or from the North is not to develop the South, but reduce restraints for development. These access to globalization and many treaties that restrain development in the global South and restrain the capacity to develop their own ways of knowing as part of this self-organization process. I think that's the main responsibility of the North is to give up its restraints on the South and its exploitation of the South.
Thank you so much for this incredible remarks. Professor Schilling.
Yeah, just to add to what Jürgen just said, I think in terms of the science, there is some progress there. I mean, just seeing the example here, I've learned a lot in the past, I think 1.5 years, Rowan. We had the pleasure now working together so that Rowan has the opportunity to come to Germany and study here. And I think we learned a lot from each other. And just looking at this room, I would say, you know, the technology does give us the opportunity to work in this conference like this. And for that matter, I also think it's probably an advantage that this is all online and not in Geneva, where I think less people would be attending. So I think there is some progress there. But as Jürgen pointed out, these growing inequalities have been there for hundreds of years, or basically since mankind. And it does take a lot of effort to change them. And right now, as the speakers have pointed out as well, the political let's say wind, or I'm not sure that's the right word, but the political atmosphere is going more or less the other way around, that more populist and more country focused ideas are taking center stage. So yeah, well, sorry, I wanted to say something positive and I ended up on the other way.
Thank you so much, Professor Schilling. And Professor de Koning.
Sorry, we're probably running out of time. So just very quickly, I just wanted to add to what was said that at the same time, we shouldn't be naive and just think that this will happen on its own. I mean, there's very strong interests to, for instance, you know, the money behind climate financing, behind REDD+ and so on, is essentially to you know, whitewash, to serve the interests of, let's say, the global North, to show that they are bringing their part and so on. And so unless we as researchers and as communities strongly engage and try to change the way these programs will be implemented, they will probably not be implemented in the way that we think will have good results. So it really requires a very active engagement from us to try and change that pathway. Thank you.
We are getting close to the ending of the session. So before ending it, I would like to hear some closing remarks from our panelists. So Professor de Koning, we can start with you.
Thank you very much. I was just going to say, I'll just give the time to Jürgen and Janpeter because I've already taken too much time. Maybe from my side, just thank you very much. I really enjoyed this panel, and it's interesting to see the great degree of convergence amongst the panelists, although we haven't in any way coordinated or was part of putting the panel together. So, and really encouraged also by the great engagement in the questions and the chat. So I think we have a lot of work in front of us and a lot of people that are eager and inspired to work on this. So let's stay in touch and look forward to this journey.
Thanks so much. Professor Schilling?
Yeah, I wanted to thank you, Buket, and all the organizers and the tech in the background for organizing this session. I think it has really been a pleasure. Also, of course, with the other panelists, and yeah, I think the strongest point that we need to focus more on the climate mitigation side as a driver of conflict and peace. I've made that point, and maybe then over to Rowan or Jürgen.
Thank you, Janpeter, and thank you, everybody. I want to say thank you for the organizers of the event. I want to say thank you for all the participants. It was a very, really nice session for learning. And I'm happy that as we continue to do what we are doing, we are going on the right way. Yeah, I know it will take some time, but we are on the correct track, and we will continue networking and cooperating with each other. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Professor Scheffran.
Yeah, I also want to thank the organizers, and I think it was a fruitful discussion. Besides the issues that were mentioned, there are various criteria that are important in this context, like sustainability, peace, resilience, justice, and so on. Something that's probably not received much attention is the issue of solidarity. I think solidarity is an important issue, as well as tolerance to diversity. So I think this we should add to the possible criteria we are discussing in this context. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Our panelists, thanks so much for giving your time, sharing your experience and expertise. And we are looking forward to hearing all of you speak again in the future for future collaborations. And also I would like to thank our audience for their time and contributions. I see that chat also has another session. And for our tech support, Chef Jean and Anna from Graduate Institute Geneva, thanks so much for your help and efforts today. And everyone, enjoy the rest of the conference and take care. Thanks so much.